the key thing to understand is that this attack on Jews is also an attack and an assault on America and on the West. And I think it's because the Jews represent much of what is best about Western civilization. You can't have a flourishing and preservation of liberty without a strong America. And by the way, I'm not sure what Israel's fate would be without a strong America. And so America is worth fighting for, and it's worth fighting for as Jews.
Hello, and welcome to the 144th episode of our podcast, but the first of Think Twice. We've renamed our program and redone the look and the graphics, but the content remains focused on the most important issues facing America, the West, Israel, and the Jewish people. Our weekly commentary and interviews still aim to help you learn more about our world and the fight to preserve the best of the Western tradition of liberty, bearing witness against antisemitism, advocating for Israel, and the rights of the Jewish people. Today, we have an important interview for you with Eric Cohen of the TIkvah Fund and his proposal for an Exodus project, in which he suggests that it's time for American Jews to abandon the elite educational institutions that have become hotbeds of hatred for Western thought, as well as bastions of anti-Semitism, put their money, energy, and students in those places where we are welcome. But before we begin, I want to remind you to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. You still don't have to wait a full week for more of our content. There is a Jonathan Tobin daily podcast where I share more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the Daily Show under Jonathan Tobin Daily on the JNS channel on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And now to today's program. Just how deep is your level of despair about America? For many American Jews, that's a question that is hard to answer, if only because confronting the reality of rising anti-Semitism is something that a lot of us would rather avoid. And if we do start thinking seriously about it, the facts about the growing hostility to Jews and Jewish life, and the support for the cause of destroying Israel at elite academic institutions, as well as throughout popular culture and much of the mainstream corporate media, is enough to lead many to despair about the Jewish future in this country. The situation is daunting. There can be no avoiding the fact that the long march of progressives through our institutions has led to a situation where a secular woke faith, rooted in critical race theory and intersectionality, has become the new orthodoxy from which little dissent is allowed. As some of us have been warning for years, tolerance and even permission for anti-Semitism is a feature and not a bug of this belief system. Rooted in Soviet-era Marxist talking points and disinformation, this effort to divide the nation and the world into two permanently warring camps of white oppressors and people of color who are their victims inevitably labels Jews as the former, and thus to be despised and libeled as colonial settlers in their own country, as well as falsely accused of genocide against Palestinians who openly boast of their intention to commit genocide against the Jews of Israel. The result of this is a situation in which acts of Jew hatred have become commonplace in our major cities and especially on college campuses. For the first time in living memory, anti-Semitism in America is not merely on the rise, but is impacting those who are affiliated with the non-Orthodox denominations, as well as the Orthodox, the political liberal, as well as those who are conservative, and even those who are not affiliated with the community. In this atmosphere, the only way to avoid the problem is to renounce any loyalty to fellow Jews and join those calling for Israel's destruction, or to remain silent. In such a situation, it's little wonder that many Jews have come to question the viability of the American Jewish future in a way that it has never been questioned before. The United States has been a unique stop in the diaspora for the Jewish people. If Jews achieve not merely economic success, but acceptance in virtually every sector of society, as well as in politics in a way they have not happened elsewhere, it is because of American exceptionalism. And if, as the progressives clearly intend, the war on Western civilization and American history and values succeeds, American exceptionalism is finished. That's why the fight against the imposition of the woke catechism of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and its inherent approval of anti-Jewish prejudice is so important. If it fails, and the battle to overturn it after it has achieved such a stranglehold on our culture and education system is one that sometimes seems unwinnable, then the era of American Jewish acceptance will also be finished. But as important as it is to face the facts about this dire situation, it's just as important to think rationally and soberly about it. As bad as things are, the situation American Jews now face is not the same as that of the Jews of Germany in 1932, or any other Holocaust analogy. We are not weak. We have both economic and political influence, and we are not alone. The vast majority of Americans are not only philo-Semitic and emphatically pro-Israel, even after the deluge of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic propaganda being foisted on them by a leftist-dominated press. There are many people in this country who recognize the problem and are beginning to address it. So as much as it may seem tempting or even rational to talk of abandoning America, treating it as one more failed stop in the long history of the diaspora, that would be a terrible mistake. Though Israel and Zionism still represents the Jewish future in a way that America cannot, we cannot give up on this country, and certainly not without a fight. We must do so not merely out of a desire to defend our lives here, but because a strong America that has not abandoned the best of Western civilization and values is essential to the worldwide struggle against the forces of tyranny, both Marxist and Islamist, that threatens Israel and the Jews everywhere. If Jewish life is unsafe in America, it will be unsafe everywhere. That's why it's absolutely essential that rather than giving up or giving in to hysterical talk about the end of American liberty and even the end of American Jewry, we must recommit to the fight to roll back the woke tide and to defeat it. Doing so won't be easy, and it may be, just as the leftist effort to impose it on this country was a generational struggle, one that we must continue. One of those thinking seriously about how to wage this struggle is Eric Cohen. And in a recent speech and essay published in Mosaic, he laid out the rationale for what he calls a new exodus, by which Jews should stop supporting institutions that are hostile to Jewish life in Israel and to invest in those where we can flourish. Cohen has been the executive director of the TIkvah Fund since 2007. He serves as the publisher of the Jewish Review of Books and Mosaic. His work has been published in many outlets, and he's the author of In the Shadow of Progress, Being Human in the Age of Technology, and co-editor of The Future Is Now, America Confronts the New Genetics. Eric Cohen, welcome to ThinkPiece.
Thanks, Jonathan. Happy to be here.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. I want to start by asking you to explain to us your analysis of American Jews, the various groupings in which you've discussed that we now fall into, and how this affects the choices that we're making, not just about our children's education, but also about how we see our place in America right now after October 7th, after everything that we've just experienced in the last 8 months.
Well, for the last number of months, the world's eyes have been on the universities and on the assault against Jews at some of the leading universities in America. And I think the first challenge is to make sense of what is going on, why this reaction, what's at stake. And I think the key thing to understand is that this attack on Jews is also an attack and an assault on America and on the West. And I think it's because the Jews represent much of what is best about Western civilization, the moral vision of the Hebrew Bible, the idea that, we live lives of dignity and purpose and moral order, the idea of the free and meritocratic society, right? Jews have succeeded and flourished in America and in American, under the umbrella of American liberty, and Jews represent that meritocracy. And finally, of course, Israel. Israel represents a noble form of nationalism, a heroic form of nationalism, but also a realism about the fact that we live in a tough world where democratic civilization and Western civilization faces real threats. And what's happened is two forces have come together to see the Jews as the target of that assault. One is the left and of all of its varieties that wants to upend this kind of Hebraic or Judeo-Christian moral universe that we live in. And the other is the kind of radical Islamic movement that wants to upend Israel and the Jews and sees them as, the little Satan in their attack on Western civilization. And so the Jews have a lot at stake in this, but so does America and the West. And I think as Jews think about our strategy, we also need to think about our responsibility to help defend American civilization at its best. So I think that's the big picture of what we face. Now, you ask, well, what can the Jews do? And what I tried to lay out in this lecture and essay that I called the Exodus Project is I think there are 4 dignified alternatives, each with a really weighty case, but different. And those are stay and fight within these existing institutions like Columbia and Harvard and Penn. And that's where many of our undergraduates and our students, Jewish students, have behaved heroically in trying to stand up against this madness. The second option is to isolate ourselves, meaning create enclaves of Jewish life and learning in America. We've seen the Orthodox community do versions of this already to try to preserve and perpetuate our way of life. The third is to give up on the American project, or more positively, to seek our destiny and our responsibility in Israel, to move, to go to school there, to build lives there. And the fourth is to build new oases of excellence, where Jews can help restore America by bringing our ideas, our talent, our energy, and our money to other universities and other parts of the country that stand alongside us in defense of liberty and in defense of Jewish values and Hebraic civilization. So what I try to lay out are 4 ways of thinking about the problem so that in the face of this crisis, we can also seize an opportunity, because that's the other side of the story. I think post-October 7th, we've seen the dark side of the forces that hate America and the West. But we've also seen the rallying of friends of the Jews, friends of America, and many Jews, this is, I think, really important, for the first time have awakened to the fact that being a Jew matters. And that's an opportunity we should seize.
Yeah, I think those are some very important points. Now, anybody who's been awake since October 7th knows that we're in the middle of a crisis. But obviously, the instincts of many American Jews is, as you laid out in one of those options, is to try and fix the elite institutions in which anti-Semitism on the rise, not to abandon them. Are they wrong? Or, and it's time for an exodus? Obviously, that's implied in the title of your project. Why are they wrong? Because they're so invested in this. And, of course, there's still kids there and kids on the way. So what is wrong with the stay and fight inside Columbia, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, whoever many schools we want to include in that category?
So what I would say is this. I think what we've seen since October 7th has really just opened the curtains for the world on problems that have been there for a long time and that are much deeper even than anti-Semitism. The real problem is that intellectually, culturally, the universities have embraced a set of ideas that are narrow, perverse, and misguided. And that doesn't mean there isn't a great program here or a great professor there or a great teacher here. But if you look at those core humanities departments, history, literature, political thought, religion, in many of the most elite universities, there's been a narrowing of ideology and a single-minded focus on ideas like critical race theory and intersectionality and all these trendy terms that reduce the complexity of human affairs to a bunch of simple slogans, and that actually see it as their purpose to undo and undermine rather than deepen, strengthen, and celebrate Jewish, Christian, and American civilization. And so the problem in the universities is not a few bad presidents or a few radical groups. The problem in many of these universities is a deeper corruption of their intellectual vision and culture that is embodied in the faculty. And I think that's a hard problem to solve. And I think many of these universities actually are what they want to be. And, they may pull back from some of the worst excesses of anti-Semitism. They may try to restore some basic order. But I think it's going to be very hard to change these places. Now, should you stay and fight? Well, one, the students who are there, especially students that are close to finishing, of course they should stay and fight. And we should admire and help those students that stay and fight, making arguments, organizing counter rallies, convening serious, cells of real thinking and learning among themselves. Those students are living like dissidents, and we should help them. For the donors and investors, if they think they have enough leverage to drive real reform at a place like Harvard or Penn or Princeton, great, they should do it. They should try. But my view is that that reform effort is likely to fail more than it will succeed, and that it is a much better strategy and a better investment to build Jewish excellence elsewhere. Because this has to be not only about a flight from anti-Semitism, it has to be about a belief that Jews can actually build something great in America. We've done it before, we're doing it now in other arenas, we can do it again in higher education. And I think our attitude has to be that Jewish excellence can be built elsewhere, and that will help lift the American project. And so I look at a place like the University of Florida, where Ben Sasse has been a beacon of moral clarity, where they're actually building a new college of Western civilization called Hamilton College that will embody the best of real liberal learning, and where they're eager to work with the Jews and bring Jewish ideas and work with Israel into that grand conversation. I'd rather bet there than trying to fight to save Columbia. I think that's likely to be a losing fight.
Yeah, the fact that they're naming it Hamilton, for anybody who went to Columbia like me, it's sort of like, well, okay, we lost the original Hamilton. Maybe we, in Hamilton Hall, maybe we need a new Hamilton. I think I want to, before we move on to some of these other options, to get into more of these ideas. I think it's important to drill down into just why these institutions are where they are, or, as you say, rightly, they've become what they wanted to be, because you sort of, as the expression, the long march of the progressives through these institutions has created faculties where, sometimes they break it down between, conservatives and liberals. I don't think that even where, conservatives are, where people even just believe in classical education, as you've promoted, are practically non-existent, especially in the humanities. And there is a whole other, level of bureaucracy now in these institutions and many others, of sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucrats, woke commissars, as I like to call them, that have created, infrastructure at these schools that is almost impossible. It was at many of these schools where university presidents have tried to do something against sort of the pro-Hamas encampments. They've been attacked by their faculty. The faculty senates are all on the sides of the pro-Hamas, the anti-Semitic mobs. I think many people, including people who are sending their kids to these schools, don't really understand just how deeply entrenched these toxic ideas and their true believers are throughout our education system.
Look, this is this is a story that's long in coming here. And it's a story that's been told well by a lot of people, which is, you go back to the 60s, you had a kind of revolt, you had a kind of countercultural eruption among students against American society, against our own history and heritage. And those students that were 18, 19, having their own encampments in the 1960s, over time took over the humanities departments and eventually the administrations of many universities. And that's what's happened. And what they've done is they've taken the best of what a liberal education ought to do, which is two kinds of things. One is to actually appreciate the complexity, the richness, the deeper truths of the human condition. Meaning to learn from the greatest minds, to learn from the greatest literature, to understand the greatest leaders in history, and to actually try to make sense of what it means to be a human being in full. And that actually invites a sense of the complexity of the human situation. But at the same time, a great liberal education, or a great American liberal education, should also deepen our attachment and our sense of responsibility to this regime, because America, for all of its flaws and limits, is one of the great regimes in the history of the world. And we instead have institutions that seem more committed to undermining American attachment and undermining American civic sense of responsibility rather than deepening it. And they do it by reducing the world to these simplifying and often silly ideologies. Multiculturalism, which is really a monocultural ideology. Intersectionality, organizing the world in these sort of simple power struggle terms. And the absurdity is obvious, meaning it's obviously absurd that so-called LGBTQ activists and Hamas activists are standing alongside each other calling for the annihilation of the Jews in Israel. Meaning there's no rational thing that brings them together other than a shared hatred of America and the West. And so the universities allow themselves to be corrupted by these misguided ideas and then to bureaucratize these ideologies through, these DEI bureaucracies and all these silly slogans which have sucked the life out of liberal education. And so, yes, you have a handful of good professors here or there, but even many of the best professors have had to stay quiet because they would be forced out if they were, open with their true worldviews and beliefs. And those who used to be seen as liberals, meaning classical liberals who believed in free argument, free inquiry, free and open debate, they're now seen as radical conservatives because the prevailing ideology in many of these places brooks no dissent. And so I think we have to think about how do you build better options. And there are other ways of thinking about higher education in America. And I think the Jews have had this great mugging by reality. We found ourselves at the center of this larger civilizational debate, and we should show real leadership in helping to build alternatives.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to question about that, or at least get your thoughts, about it, is, are we sure that the bulk of American Jewry really has been mugged by reality, in spite of all the evidence that they should be? We have a generation of American Jews, sort of the people sending their kids to college, who have been ingrained in the idea of, they're part of the credentialed elites in our culture, and the credentialed elites are tied in so closely with these institutions, whether through their own lives or through what they think is good or what they think grants access to success in this country. And, you can have conversations with people about, the situation at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Penn is bad. But, if your kid has a chance to get in there, many of them are still, tied into this idea that, that there is no real alternative to give them the same kind of cachet, whether it's status or, a real belief that this is, the key to their kid's future or to their acceptance. How do we break through on that? I mean, if the images of the last 8 months haven't done it, is there a way really, to convince people that they should be thinking about alternatives beyond just, the idea, the situation is bad? How do we break through this mindset?
I joked in this essay and lecture that, for many American Jews, those Ivy League stickers on the back of their cars are like, the mezuzahs on their doorposts. And the metaphor is that for a long time, and by the way, for legitimate and understandable reasons, the universities for many Jews have been the temples. Because they allowed us access to the meritocratic opportunities of American life. They were places like Jews that valued at their best education, that offered practical opportunity, a seat at the table of American culture, with, by the way, a long history in the old world of not having that seat at the table of the high citadels of the culture. And so For a long time, Jews, for very recognizable and meaningful reasons, looked to the universities as their temples. And what's happened has shaken that faith. And I think for many Jews, only temporarily, and they'll kind of revert to their past prejudices. And for many Jews, they care about Israel, they hate anti-Semitism, but they basically don't want the weight of Jewish history on their shoulders.
Sure.
But I do think a lot of Jews are more open than ever to taking that weight of Jewish history and that richness of Jewish civilization seriously for the first time. And I think what American Jews have to recognize is that, one, we are prestige creators. We don't have to simply traffic in the legacy prestige of the Harvards and Columbias. We actually have the creativity and talent to build prestige within American society. We have to have that Jewish confidence to build anew. I think, second, as Jews, we have to recognize that our friends and allies may be different than what we thought. That, if you compare the scene of, protests on the Columbia lawn versus the hundreds of Zionist flags on the lawn at Southern Methodist University, you might say, maybe we're not looking at our own situation correctly, because for all the reasons to worry right now about America, America's still a mostly free, great country where Jews can actually be a part of shaping the American story. And that was never fully the case in the same way in old Europe. And so we have many friends and allies around America, and we can work with them to build other pathways of excellence. And I think it just requires a paradigm shift in our thinking. And if we can make that shift, then I think there's real hope and opportunity. Does that mean every Jew is going to have this transformation? Of course not. Many Jews will revert back to the kind of the old accommodationist norm or the old prestige, hungry norm. But I think more Jews than I've seen, and I've been running TIkvah for almost 20 years now, are open to something else. And I think we have to seize that opportunity.
Yeah, well, I think you make some very important points there. And the first one I want to just hone in on is the idea that Jews are not alone in this country. I think it's very important to point out that the majority of the American people never voted for DEI, for this great cultural shift, and that includes Democrats as well as Republicans. And when I read and see a lot of this sort of, and I understand why people are catastrophizing after the evidence of the last 8 months, and talking about, we're Germany in 1932 and all kinds of other, so understandably hysterical analogies. We have to remember that that is not the situation of American Jews. The vast majority of Americans are philo-Semitic. They're pro-Israel. We aren't alone, but the thing is, most of those people who are with us on these issues and against these toxic ideas are on the other side of the blue-red divide. And that's the big, in a bifurcated, a nation that's politically and culturally bifurcated, that's the big leap, isn't it? Getting, you speak about Florida and SMU, one of the jokes that I heard that there has been there were no pro-Hamas mobs at any school that had an SEC, a Southeastern Conference football championship. And that's probably true, but that's also the sort of schools that Jewish families don't think to send their kids to Alabama or outside of Florida to Florida. That's a big problem there, isn't it?
Look, imagine if the 300 most exceptional Jewish professors in the country and across every field of sciences, the humanities, business, medicine, just stood up and said, we are leaving these legacy places as a matter of Jewish self-respect, and we are going to take our excellence elsewhere. We're heading to the SEC. Those places would instantaneously be more impressive. It just requires the Jewish self-confidence to do it. But look, I think this is a moment of real disruption in in the kind of American political order, and Jews find themselves at the center of that story because many of the challenges that the Jews face of preserving a traditional culture, of passing down a sense of identity and history and heritage, of living, covenantal lives. Well, religious Christians face the same challenges in American society. And I think if you think about it just a civic and a policy level, like what are the things that matter the most to Jews? School choice, so we have the resources to give our kids a Jewish education. Religious freedom, so we have the liberty to practice our faith, in accordance with our own traditions and values. A strong connection between America and Israel and deepening that America-Israel alliance. You think about some of the basic priorities, well, the more conservative states embrace those ideas. And if you were being the sort of grand strategist of American Jewry, I think you'd say, look, over the long term, the civic soil of, Florida, Texas, Arizona, is going to be more fruitful for Jews than New York, New Jersey, and California. And I think what will happen over time is there will be a demographic shift of American Jewry that parallels a cultural shift of American Jewry. And that will hopefully be combined with a sense that Jews have something big to contribute to America, and we should do it in strong friendship and alliance with other religious Americans, Christian Americans, patriotic Americans, who share our core values. And I think that shift over the next few decades will start to happen.
Yeah, I think there's a real possibility for that, and I think you and I have both seen how the energy in the Jewish world in this country has started to shift to places like Florida, as opposed to the traditional bastions like New York, where where more Jews still live. But let's talk about choices now. We're both alluding to a process that will go on for a long time. But for Jewish families thinking about what colleges to send their kids to now, like for next, for the following fall, what are the alternatives where they can safely send their kids who, without, as you alluded to in your essay, there are plenty of Jews who, are ready to put their dukes up and fight. But do you really want to send your kid someplace to fight and be a dissident and be under fire? So, there are, new alternatives. This fall, the University of Austin, the new project that people like Barry Weiss and historian Niall Ferguson have been behind, and that seems very promising as a bastion of classical education, but that it just started, and not everybody's going to go there. There are non-Jewish institutions like Claremont, but that's a tough sell for a lot, for a lot of Jews. What are the choices really if you've got a kid who could get into an elite institution, as many Jews still aspire to, where you don't want to have them confronted by this, woke mindset and this new secular religion in which their faith, their identity, their ties to Israel are under fire?
Yeah, look, I think it always, the story of the Exodus, the biblical story of the Exodus is not only or even primarily a retreat from Egypt. It's an effort to build a new way of life in a sanctified land. And I think our mentality has got to be not primarily flight from, but building something great. And so as we think about, as a Jew, what should be some of the elements of a great university? Well, one, a place that actually values the contribution that Jewish civilization has made to the West. I mean, if the West is this fruitful combination of Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, well, Jerusalem's the founding city of the West. And we need to go to places that take those ideas seriously. We should be looking for universities that actually celebrate Israel, want to build deeper academic partnerships with Israeli universities, promote the study of Israel and study abroad in Israel. We should be looking for places that actually want to teach the American story, including the contributions that Jews have made to the American story. So we've got to know what we're looking for. But I think the key kind of supply side philanthropic opportunity is, without a huge amount of money, we could strengthen the Jewish infrastructure in a lot of universities that would be thrilled to welcome more Jewish students and thrilled to welcome more Jewish ideas and more Jewish professors. Invest in kosher food. Invest in serious rabbis who are on those campuses. Invest in pro-Israel life and clubs in those places. Build oases of excellence within the best of these existing universities. I think the most exciting thing, as I mentioned earlier, is the University of Florida, which, by the way, already has thousands of Jewish undergraduates,
Sure.
Which is already an elite university, and now has a president and a vision that's actually friendly to these ideas. But I think you could have 20 University of Floridas. You could do this in other states around the country, in both public universities and private universities, that say, of course we celebrate the important place that Jews have in the West. And so I think this can be a real moment of institution building. And I think parents and students, thinking about college, have to look at this market in a different way. We're actually thinking about a project where we're going to try to create a TIkvah version, a Jewish version of how do you rank and evaluate colleges. We all know the power that U.S. News and World Report has had on shaping college behavior and on highlighting, where students want to go. Well, we need to do that in an intellectually and Jewishly serious way and actually show there's a new map of alternatives, and that will drive admissions interest, donor interest, Jewish communal interest in those places. So I think this can be done. It just requires mobilizing our energies in a new way.
Yeah, I think that's a good reason to hope, and that's a good idea. Of course, part of the problem is not just the hold that elite institutions have on American Jews. It's that, of course, many American Jews have embraced progressive ideology. And by that, I don't just mean the fact that there are a lot of kids with Jewish names or Jewish backgrounds who are, sort of part of the pro-Hamas mobs on campuses, but the fact that a lot of our leading institutions, including in groups, including some that are now speaking out, very ardently about anti-Semitism, haven't quite broken the ties with the woke DEI mindset. I mean, I mentioned the ADL, which still incorporates a lot of that, a lot of those ideas into its own education curricula. And it kind of makes for a very difficult, it makes for a very difficult problem if, on the one hand, you're saying, well, we're against all this anti-Semitism, but you're not fully against the ideas that are driving it. Part of this is a failure of Jewish leadership, isn't it?
Look, the first thing I want to emphasize is that the most dangerous temptation in a moment like this is to traffic in our own victimization. And that is not what Jews should do. Meaning, we do not want to see ourselves as another color in the intersectional, rainbow coalition of victimhood. Like, that is not the right mentality.
And that's exactly what a lot of Jews have done. You remember earlier this year, Jews in Hollywood complaining about anti-Semitism and about how the new Oscar categories were excluding them. They were just like, include us as victims, too, in the DEI mindset.
And that's exactly the wrong mindset. And it means, at a deeper level, we have to understand the difference between an identity and identity politics. The Jews have a distinctive identity, that have a distinctive history. We are the carriers of a great civilization that has contributed exceptional things to the world and to the West. And when we think about what does it mean to pass down a Jewish identity, what does it mean to resist assimilation? It means we're doing it in the name of something high, in the name of something dignified, in the name of something I would argue indispensable to the fate of the American project, namely our Hebraic way of life and our Hebraic values. And so in this moment of anti-Semitism, we have to refocus our mind on Jewish exceptionalism. And that the assault on the Jews is the kind of, the perverse inversion of the exceptionalism of the Jews. And we should say that not with arrogance or hubris, but with a sense of purpose. And if you impart that to young people, then you have the confidence and courage to build. And so I think, look, for those Jews who are going to march alongside, Hamas activists in the name of undoing America and, defeating oppression and seeing Israel as an oppressor. Honestly, we're not going to fix those. One mourns for them, but you're not going to help them. But I think there are a lot of Jews that are more open to rethinking their assumptions and who know that standing in those marches is wrong, that attacking Israel for trying to defend itself against an evil terrorist organization is wrong. And therefore you got to rethink some of your other assumptions. And so, I'm not looking to comment on this Jewish organization or that Jewish organization. They're going to do what they're going to do. I'm privileged to lead a Jewish organization, and we're trying to build new educational institutions that answer this crisis. And I think if you inspire Jews with a purpose, some of them will rise to the occasion. And that's what we should do.
Speaking of that and what you're trying to build, when you were last on this podcast over a year ago, we spoke of your commitment in trying to promoting classical Jewish education, in which we combined the best of the West, the Western canon, with Jewish learning, and to that end, TIkvah had begun work on a new school in New York, a secondary school, and of course, a big part of this problem is not just about colleges; it's about K-12, and indeed, many people are working on the problem of the sort of antisemitism and the woke mindset throughout our educational system. But tell me about the progress of that project and whether you see more people picking up, have picked up this idea of classical Jewish education and how we can better promote that.
Yeah, well, look, your point about K-12 is so important. And I think, when TIkvah began its work many years ago, we were focused mostly on college students originally, and we still are doing a lot with college students and thinking about the university question. But what we realized early is that if you don't get to kids younger, if you don't start to form their sentiments and their souls and their worldview at an earlier age, it's much harder once they get to late high school and college. And I would say, looking at America, one of the more hopeful things in the last few decades has been the rise of this classical education movement, meaning a desire to kind of put the most foundational virtues and most important human questions back at the center of K-12 education, to teach the foundational arts of grammar and logic and rhetoric and mathematics so kids actually have the tools to think clearly and to contribute to civic life in a meaningful way, to actually bring the great books back to the center, including the great religious texts back to the center of our pedagogy. And we're trying to build a Jewish version of that, and the response has been exciting. We're going to be opening this new school, Emmett Classical Academy in New York, in the fall. We hope it's the first of a number of schools over time that we can build that are shaped by this Jewish classical vision. And we've already begun working with, a few hundred Jewish educators, full-time teachers in Jewish schools that are excited by this approach, and who think that, showing the ways in which Jews have contributed to the West as a part of a history, literature, Western Civ approach to K-12 is a way to inspire young Jews to have a kind of sense of purpose, and to understand in a much deeper way what they've given to history and the ways in which history now rests on their shoulders. And that's what we're building, and the response has been energizing.
I want to circle back to something that we discussed, at least in passing, at the start of our conversation, and that is, the sense of despair that a lot of Jews feel about our current situation, about our place in America, because they've been shocked, including, many who really didn't think about these issues, as you've alluded to it, about being mugged, by the reality of the situation on campuses and even in the streets of our cities. And this feeling that, we've had a good run here in America. It was great while it lasted, but perhaps, history has caught up with us, and, that it's time to move on, as you alluded to, as one of the options. And certainly Israel is always a good option for people who want to invest in the Jewish future. But, I think there is, both truth and too much despair in those who think this way, because number one, they're right in the sense that if American exceptionalism is gone, we've spoken of Jewish exceptionalism, but American exceptionalism is the core reason why Jews were so accepted and had so much success in this country because of its, ties to the Western tradition. And since, what we call woke is attacking American exceptionalism, seeking to destroy it, America's whole idea of itself. And if that prevails, and that is not a certainty, but it is certainly a possibility right now, more than a possibility, then American exceptionalism is done, then the Jewish future is done. What do you say to those who are ready to sort of say, okay, that's it for America, turn out the lights, let's go someplace else? Why is that really not a good idea for the American Jewry and as well as for Israel?
Let me say something about Israel, and then I'll answer that very directly. Look, any Jew who hears the summons of history to move to Israel, to make their life in the sovereign Jewish state, to serve in the Israeli army, to raise kids who will serve in the Israeli army, to celebrate the Jewish calendar on the sacred soil of our ancestors, one only celebrates and honors them. And as a Zionist, I also believe that our ultimate destiny lies in Israel. So, we celebrate those Zionists who leave to make their life there. But America matters a lot. And I want to say two things about America and why America, I believe, is both different and indispensable. America is different because religious liberty is written into the DNA of this country from the beginning. And Hebraic ideas, including that America is a kind of Exodus story, were written into this country from the beginning. If there's a place where American sacred scripture and Jewish near sacred scripture meet, it's Washington's letter to Newport about not the fact that in America, it's not mere toleration, but it's the flourishing of the Jews as Jews within American soil and as full parts of the American story. That's what our country was always been from the beginning. And so we have to recover our founding DNA in America, not become something we're not. The second thing I want to say about America is that as goes America, so goes the West and arguably the world. Meaning you can't have a flourishing and preservation of liberty without a strong America. And by the way, I'm not sure what Israel's fate would be without a strong America. And so America is worth fighting for, and it's worth fighting for as Jews. And I think many of the problems that ail America today are problems where Jews actually have something important to say. The breakdown of the family, where Jews have something important to say. The restoration of religious liberty, where Jews have something important to say. The alliance with Israel, which is a deeper indication that America stands courageously and powerfully behind our friends. That's something where Jews have something important to say. And so I think American Jews in search of a purpose should say, yeah, you're darn right, we're going to help take responsibility for America. And we have a lot of friends and allies here. And this is not Germany 1932. It's not good. There's a lot of real problems. There's a lot of reasons to be alarmed, but this is not Germany in 1932. And if we have that mentality, we're going to doom ourselves to despair. And that's the wrong mentality.
Well, that's a very important point to make and an important point to end on. Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today and for all of your insights. I hope more Jews take your advice to heart, and we'll be looking forward to hearing more from you in the future and the progress of both the TIkvah's educational efforts and the Exodus Project. We also want to thank our audience. Please remember to tune in to the Jonathan Tobin Daily Podcast every day. And whether you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, or any of the other podcast platforms, watching us live on Facebook or on X, or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to JNS, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again next week.